Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Clifton, and in this video presentation I'm going to present my findings from nearly 10 years of auditing the quality of Google Analytics data, the results of which are actually quite surprising, if not a little bit disturbing, both for website owners and Google themselves. So, as is usual for me, I'm going to skip over this slide. If you're interested in who I am, my experience and why I'm passionate about Google Analytics, please pause and take a moment to read this slide, or simply go to brianclifton.com. So the heart of what this study is about is the general lack of trust in online data, which permeates from the top of an organization downwards. Now in 2017, a couple of reports put a qualitative number on this issue by asking senior managers their opinions, and these two numbers really do stand out. So there's definitely a broad trust issue, and in my opinion this comes down to three reasons. The first is that the data setup, in other words how data is collected and processed into your reports, is poorly understood by the vast majority of analytics users. Now as users, that's not our fault. The problem stems from the fact that users are generally excluded from the setup process in the first place. But if you don't know what's going into your data stream, it's next to impossible to identify the quality of what's coming out. In addition to this disconnect, historically a web analytics setup has often been a set and forget project, rather than what it should be, which is an ongoing, evolving process, because websites are of course ongoing and evolving. So even if you start with a perfect setup, over time data quality degrades, and from experience that can happen pretty quickly. I can guarantee you that if no one is looking after your data quality, in 12 to 18 months time your data will be so full of holes and unanswerable question marks that it's next to useless. And lastly, for web analytics, data governance is extremely poor. Now perhaps in Google's case this comes down to Google Analytics being free, i.e. a tool that is readily accessible to play with and so not taken seriously by the organization. But as we know, data is valuable and collecting it comes with responsibilities, regardless if the tools used are free. So as you've probably deduced, the fix to all of these problems is to audit your data. So before I come to the study, I wanted to highlight that auditing does come with a couple of its own challenges. The first is that bad data is actually difficult to identify. For one, there is lots of it, so you have the needle in a haystack scenario, and for the other is that it doesn't actually come with a label telling you if it's good, bad or ugly. My analogy here is that the clear looking liquid on the left may not be the right choice. The murky looking liquid on the right may actually contain the more richer information you need. My point here is that you cannot tell by simply looking at it. It requires time-consuming investigation. Another challenge of auditing is that once poor or polluted data is spotted, it is practically impossible to clean retroactively, either because it cannot be done technically or because the effort required to reprocess the data cannot be justified. Now the reason for this is that most web analytics data nowadays is collected in aggregate, meaning data is pre-processed into groups, such as visitors from organic search or visitors from campaign X. And that's because pre-processed reports are much faster to load. For example, you can try this yourself. If you apply an advanced segment in Google Analytics, i.e. segmenting data on the fly, you will know that the reports get generated in a matter of a few seconds, even if the report must be recalculated from millions of rows of data. Now without aggregation, that could be hours or even days. Another reason for aggregation is that the tool brings a level of privacy built in, i.e. there is the deliberate disconnect from tracking of individual users, and that's good in today's GDPR world. Okay, so on to the study. And this is a summary of who I audited. These are clients that contacted me and gave me access to their Google Analytics account. In summary, it covers 75 commercial websites, 41% of which had an e-commerce facility. Now the websites cover a range of market verticals and target different geographic regions. The web properties in question are all brand leaders, 13 of which with a global presence. And typically the traffic to these sites is between 100,000 and 10 million visits per month, and the study covers the period 2010 to 2017, with approximately half of the audits conducted from 2013 onwards. The method uses the weighted scorecard approach that I described in my last book, Successful Analytics. Essentially, there are 15 areas that are audited with multiple tests to cover data governance, marketing and acquisition, bespoke tracking and conversion tracking. Each area has its own weighting to provide emphasis on those areas that are more important to the business than others. As you can see, most are weighted as 1.0 and those have an equal importance. However, those weighted as 2.0, for example the data compliance section, are considered twice as important as those weighted as 1, while those weighted with less than 1, e.g. the error page tracking section, are given less importance. Each coloured column then represents a full data audit, and they consist of red, amber and green scores. Red is obviously the problem area, which can mean the data is missing or polluted, or it could be a PII issue. Green means all is well and nothing to fix, while amber is everything in between. So for example, for file download tracking, it could mean there is only partial tracking taking place, i.e. some file downloads are tracked while others are not. Now each colour represents a score. Green equals 10, amber is 5, while red is 0. For each column, the colour scores are multiplied by their weighting, summed, and then normalized so that they represent a number out of 100. This overall number I call the data's quality index. The quality index therefore represents how close a website is to a best practice Google Analytics setup and governance. So in this example, the quality index is 40.7, meaning out of a possible score of 100, it is only 41% of the way there. It's a quantitative measure of how poor the setup is. And this is what the score distribution looks like across the 75 websites audited. As you can see, the distribution is on the low side, i.e. to the left side of the chart, and the average is only 35.7. That is only 35.7% of a best practice Google Analytics setup. Another standout metric is that only 12% of audited websites have a score of more than 50. Now 50 is an important benchmark in my opinion. Essentially, I won't work with data whose quality index is less than 50. There are simply way too many gotchas for me to invest the time in analysing data with such a low quality index. I aim for a consistent score of between 70 and 80 for analysis, though of course the higher the better. Now if you were to deploy Google Analytics tracking on your website, and let's assume you have 100% coverage, i.e. it fires correctly on every page, and you were the only person with access to the data, so no governance issues to worry about. By my method you would have a quality index of around 15, and that's because every website has more than just page views to track, be it file downloads, outbound links, site search, campaign tracking, other users or events, goal conversions, transactions and so forth. As you know, today it's no longer good enough to simply track sessions and page views. So how can a website have a score of only 4.5? Well, in this case they were collecting PII in their URLs, i.e. from form submissions, and when this is present I deduct a score of 10 from their governance score. Now let's look at what is failing in more detail. As you can see from this overview, there's a lot of red, quite a bit of amber, and not a great deal of green. Each column represents an audit of a different website. And by the way, the white cells are features missing from the website, i.e. not audited. Remember, it is the sum of the weighted scores down the column that is the overall quality index for each website. So I'm going to highlight 6 sections to discuss in more detail, starting with the first row, Setup and Governance. From a GDPR perspective, the first row of my table is a key section, and what I have discovered is worrying. That is, only 24% of the audited websites get this right. In other words, only 24% of the first row here is green. Now there are a number of governance areas that I audit, but the 2 main failures are this. Firstly, the collection of personal information, for example names, email addresses, postal addresses, etc. And secondly, how fragile data access is, in other words, who has access to your data and with what permissions, are key failures. When looking at those areas, the scary part is that 1 in 5 sites have a PII issue. This is usually collected accidentally within page view URLs from form submissions, but also can be more deliberate capture of data, such as click events or custom dimensions. If there's one thing you remember from this presentation, please let it be this: audit your data governance to protect yourself from PII issues and unauthorized access. As the GDPR law makes clear, ignorance of such issues is no longer an excuse. So far not so good. The next section is about how well you're able to track your website visitor journeys, and that means ensuring you have your Google Analytics tracking code on every page, firing correctly and without any unknown tracking code sending data to someone else that your organization is not aware of, and you would be surprised at how often I discover that. Now, the fact that around half of all websites get this wrong was a surprise to me. The reason being that I had assumed that inserting tracking code within a CMS template would be easy and bulletproof. However, for larger sites, the common issue is missing tracking code from pages, leaving holes in the visitor journey, as well as the potential to mess up metrics such as time on site, page views per session, etc., or duplicate tracking codes firing on the same page. These problems usually arise from new pages being created or redesigned, or new sections added to a website where the original CMS template is not used. Or it can be from the fact that different platforms are used for content deployment. Now, a tag management system such as Google Tag Manager could solve these issues, but this also is not bulletproof unless you have strong governance for that tool also. Even with tag management systems in place, I have found tracking code firing multiple times. Often this is the result of one user setting up tags while unaware that another user has done the same thing using a different approach. Looking at lead generation, i.e. sites where collecting a visitor's contact details is crucial, the large failure here is mostly due to not being able to differentiate form views versus form submissions. What I have found is that often marketers and salespeople receive these submissions via another system, and they are focused on following up what is received, i.e. converting the lead into a customer, rather than looking at the initial conversion rate of converting the anonymous visitor to a lead. Now that is understandable, but it does miss the opportunity of understanding and improving that initial conversion rate. And when you consider that a typical initial conversion rate for a website is around 3%, i.e. 97% do not submit a form, that's a big opportunity missed. Similar to that issue is not being able to differentiate successful form submissions versus failed ones. That will overinflate your conversion rate if you have a form that is causing your visitors pain, and that is the opposite signal to what you want to receive in such a situation, because it encourages you to continue the bad user experience instead of the data acting as a flag for you to be able to fix it. A similar poor score value is found for transaction tracking. Only 26% scored a green here. That said, I wasn't too surprised to discover this when I collated my data. After all, transaction tracking is probably the hardest part of a setup to get right. Comparing your Google Analytics transaction data with your back-end sales system is an obvious comparison to make, but I want to point out that you should not focus on achieving an exact match. Time differences for when an order is processed, returns, cancellations, order modifications, etc. will all be reflected in your back-end sales system as it should be, but may not be reflected in Google Analytics. And if you think about it, that is probably what you want. For example, suppose you're a shoe retailer and a customer returns a pair of shoes due to a problem with the size. That is obviously a return for your sales system, but I argue it should not be added as a return in Google Analytics because that would mark down the marketing performance of your website when it should not. The return decision simply has nothing to do with your website content or its marketing. Essentially what I am saying is that returns are a metric for a different system. Now I allow for a 5% discrepancy between Google Analytics and the sales system, be it revenue, number of transactions and so forth. That is fine. Now between 5 and 10% discrepancy, it is worth investigating to clarify if you have a systematic error, and anything above 10% I consider to be an urgent sanity check to see what is being missed. Visitor segmentation is a foundation for all Google Analytics analysis. That is, there is little value in treating all of your visitors the same. Some are clearly more valuable than others. Being able to differentiate and therefore analyze in detail your new customers versus existing customers versus engaged visitors, contributors, non-engaged visitors, subscribers and prospects provides the foundation information that allows you to optimize your content and marketing. Now websites often think about this, but only on a per session basis, i.e. what is the visitor doing on my website right now? Did they log in? Did they subscribe? Did they transact, etc.? Now that is of course important information, but the real value in segmentation comes when you know that information at the user level, meaning knowing that a visitor to your website who has come back on 5 occasions, for example, and not transacted, is actually a high-value existing customer and not a new prospect. You do that through the use of visitor scope custom dimensions, and only a very lowly 7% of websites audited do that. The last audit item I want to highlight is campaign tracking. And the low level of a green score at this section is worrying here, and I would have thought it's also troubling for Google too. After all, the reason Google acquired the technology that became Google Analytics was to help marketers better understand the performance of their campaigns. The business model for providing Google Analytics for free is based on having better informed marketers who in turn will spend more money with online campaigns, i.e. AdWords. But the problems I encounter with this is that campaign tracking setup is in the hands of end users, and that is marketers. However, without a well-defined process for setting up campaigns, pretty much everybody has a slightly different approach to setting up their campaigns. It isn't long, therefore, that duplication and confusion kicks in and often leads to campaign paralysis, i.e. few bother anymore and instead turn to other systems for refuge, such as marketing automation platforms. When the truth is, you can get very detailed and precise campaign performance data within Google Analytics and even sophisticated attribution modeling, and it's straightforward to set up. But I feel that is the issue. It's too easy, and the onus is on you to build a well-defined campaign tracking process. Hence, campaign tracking has become a bit of a Wild West. That said, it remains straightforward and free to get on top of. So overall, these are the numbers broken down as the percentage for each colour score. By the way, I should mention that one of the interesting findings from this study is that size does not matter. That is, although this study focuses on enterprise sites investing significant sums online, I see the same problems with smaller brands and smaller websites, be it less pages or less traffic volume. So apart from the interest in knowing the state of Google Analytics data as a whole and the problems that many face in getting this right, what are the next steps for you? As you might expect, I can't stress enough the importance of auditing your data, but I'm going to briefly show you how to do it painlessly and much more efficiently than the manual method I used. As you may have guessed from the titles of my slides, performing audits and writing about data quality over the years has led me to the development of a new auditing tool called Verified Data. This does away with the limitations of manual auditing by combining a search and discovery crawler with some smart technology. Essentially, the crawler part looks for content on your website, simulating a user, clicking on links and buttons, and listening for any tracking signals. Combined with this is some artificial intelligence employed to look for signs of PII, i.e. evidence of personal information, but also classifying this by context in which it is found, i.e. probability. And in addition, a heuristic process works through the data, adjusting the weight of evidence based on how likely each evidence is to lead to the conclusion that data is either good or bad. And so the purpose of all this technology is to avoid human frailties when it comes to auditing. One of those can be biased, i.e. because it is your data, no one internally wants to admit it may be wrong and the consequences that has on career prospects. Another is that some issues, such as PII, can be very low in number and therefore next to impossible to find with the naked eye. It's simply swallowed by the mountain of other data, that is the needle in a very large haystack scenario. Automation also removes the issue of subjectivity. That is, what I consider poor data, another person may have a different opinion on. Hence, while all the audits I used in this studies were conducted or reviewed by me personally. And lastly, the biggest challenge in auditing is a lack of senior resource to do it. That is finding people with the expertise and experience that can do this, and not just once, but regularly. So thank you for listening to the state of Google Analytics. Although this has been specifically about Google Analytics data, all web analytics tools suffer from the same challenges. So please spread the word of the importance of auditing your web analytics data.